Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Play for another Setup and Rules video. Today I'm going to show you Neta-Tanka. Wah! Here it is. This is actually the Kickstarter Deluxe version, which I was lucky enough to get off of a friend of mine, but if you've got this version, that's cool. If you've got the retail version, don't worry, everything that we say in this video will be applicable to both versions. The upgrades in the deluxe version are largely just aesthetic, with one exception, the mountain expansion, which I'll show you at the end of the video, so that you don't need to bother with that if you've got the retail version. Neta-Tanka is a Euro worker placement game for 1 to 4 players that takes roughly 90 minutes to play. But that depends on the players and how familiar they are with this kind of game. It's largely a sort of analytical thinking, resource management game as well. Now, if you have the deluxe version like this, then you can play up to 5 players, but if you don't, then you can't. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the sections of this video in the description below, just like I normally do, so you can find a specific section if there's something that you want to look up or have a refresher on as well, or just have a bit of an idea about the layout of the video. So without further ado, we'll start with our normal starting place, which is to go through the components in the box. And during this section, I will mention where the deluxe components are different. But if you want to skip straight into the setup or the gameplay explanation, then you can find the time codes down below. So the first thing we've got here is the board, and the board has a standard size, which kind of looks like spring or summertime, and it's also got a winter side, which has snow on it and is more difficult. We've also got here the player boards, and this is the deluxe one that comes with the cutouts, but if you don't have the deluxe set, you'll just have a flat player board like this. And these come in 4 colors: blue, yellow, green, and orange. And if you have the deluxe set, you'll have a 5th purple player board as well. Then we've got these totem pole trackers, and you'll only need one of these in the game, but they're double-sided, and there's one for solo play, 2 play, 3 play, and 4 players as well. So that changes slightly based on player count. And of course, if you've got the deluxe edition, you'll have a 5th player one as well. So we've got some leather or hide resources here. Here we've got wood. These components are the same in both versions of the game. Then we've got meat, which will be red discs in the retail version. Mushrooms, which will be purple discs in your retail version. You've got bone here, which is a luxury resource and is a bit rarer and more valuable in game terms. And if you have the standard version of the game, you'll just have discs like these two. We've got some tents here that only come with the deluxe version of the game. Here we've got some generosity tokens that come in 1 and 5s. They're the same across both versions of the game. And so these are the resources that you'll be using in the game to build things and purchase things and win the points. And if you have the deluxe version of the game, you'll have this box to store them in. So these are the Canoe tiles here with a plain back and actions on the front. Now, if you've got the deluxe version, you'll have 16 of these, and if you've got the retail version, you'll have 12. And you'll randomly use a number of them based on the player count in any given game. You should also have 4 more tiles with black banners along the bottom, which are the last final round tiles, and more on that when we get set up. We've got a deck of Neta-Tanka cards here, with special abilities on the back. We've got a deck of handicrafts here, which have recipes for things you can make on the back. And then here we've got a deck of secret objectives. Each player will have one of these at the beginning of the game to get some bonus points if they complete it. Note that these are distinct from these, which are your solo play cards, and they have slightly different backs that escalate, and you'll need to use these if you want to play by yourself. Here we've got some retail versions of the first player token, 2 buffalo tokens, and a round marker token. And here we've got the Kickstarter versions of the same things. So they're all just 3D and wooden now. We've also got this Nomad meeple, and he can be hired and stuff during the game, but you won't have the colored print on him unless you have the deluxe edition. These are special link abilities that you can purchase from a special link spot, which will make more sense later on. But note that they're round. The fact that they're round makes them distinct from these ones, which are ovals. These are used to randomize the link spaces on the board. Note that this will upset the balance of the board. Now, I've also made each player a little individual player baggie here. So in the player bag, you've got 5 meeples, and this is because we have a 5-player game. We've got one extra guy. This one, which looks distinct from the others, called the Chief. but the rest of you will only have 4 Nomads per player. These are only distinct from the retail versions in that they have the prints on them. Then if you have the deluxe version, you'll have this totem pole token, and if you're playing the retail version, you'll have this one. These are link tokens, and they're the same in both copies of the game. Each player has 3. And finally, each player has this copy token as well. If you have the retail version of the game, you'll have this set in 4 different colors, and if you have the deluxe version, you'll have an extra color. So each player will need their player baggie and their board to start the game, but you won't need both totem pole tokens. We've got this Scorepad as well for tracking scoring at the end of the game. You've also got some stickers for tracking achievements, which is an addition at the end of the rulebook. You can track what's happened in your games and whether you accomplished certain things. Of course, you've also got a rulebook with a quick rules reminder on the back of it as well, but that just about does it for the retail copy of the game. But I'll just quickly show you the components for the Mountain expansion if you've got the deluxe edition. Otherwise, you can skip ahead. The Mountain expansion comes with this mountain board to the God of Prosperity, a little token here for changing the Gather Thoughts action space, these special blue resources, and this set of resource cost tokens as well. So with that, we've covered all the components in the box. So what we're going to do now is set up a 3-player version of the game, but I will mention during the setup where there are differences between the 3, 2, and 4-player versions. I'm not going to cover the 5-player version because that's the deluxe set only, and it's not very different to the other versions. And I'm not going to mention the solo mode either. There is some distinctions in the 2-player mode that are worth mentioning if you intend to play that, so I will cover that. So we've got here pretty much all the components we're going to need for the 3-player version of the game. And we're going to start by setting out all of our resources there in a common pool that anyone can draw from. Note that all of these are supposed to be not component limited. So if you run out of any given resource, then you just use a replacement resource. And if you've got the retail version, don't worry about these tents because those are from the deluxe version. And you don't need them to play, they're just aesthetic. Then we've got the 3 decks of cards here, and we're going to start by setting out the Neta-Tanka cards, which is the deck here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to give it a shuffle, and then we're going to set out 5 cards along the side of the board face up. And then we'll turn the top card of the deck face up and leave it on top of the deck at the top of the stack. And then we'll do the exact same with the Handicraft cards. And then we're going to sort out the Canoe tiles. Now make sure you set aside the 4 with the black banners and just take the remaining tiles, and then we're going to deal out a random number based on the number of players. Up here on the board we've got the round tracker as well as the slot for the Canoe tiles. So you'll notice here that we've got a count of the number of Canoe tiles you put out per players. So in a 1 to 2 player game you put out 5, in a 3 player game it's 7, and with 4 more players it's 10. Now we've got a deck of 16 Canoe tiles here, in addition to 4 final scoring tiles, which you can tell are distinct because of the black banners on the bottom. So this number includes a final scoring tile. So what you're going to do is take, for a 3-player game, 6 of these tiles at random, shuffled out of the deck, and we're going to put them face down here on the Canoe spot, get rid of the rest back to the box, we won't need them, and then we'll take one of the final scoring tiles, bring the total up to 7, and we'll put it under here. And now, in a 3-player game, we're going to play 7 rounds, which is why there's a 3-player marker that ends after round 6. In a 2-player game, it's 5. And in a 4+ player game, you play 10 rounds. And that's important because the number of Canoe tiles needs to be equal to the number of rounds. We'll stick the round marker on the first space of the round. We'll stick the little wandering nomad man here onto his space there. You'll notice the Neta-Tanka here in the center of the board, and just below them an empty link, which does not have an icon like the other links. Take the stack of discs that are completely round, the 9 discs, and just put them into a pile next to this space. Players can check this pile at any time, so there's no need to shuffle it or anything like that. Just make sure they stay there. Now we'll put out the totem pole board. Make sure you've got it the right way around for the number of players you've got. It might be helpful to note that all of the totem pole boards have these little player symbols down here. So you can see here this is the 2-player board, and this is how many nomads each player starts with. So I've got 3 players, so I'm going to put out the 3-player board just there. And then every player is going to take their totem pole token from their player boards, and note that we've got the fancy wooden ones, you might have the cardboard ones that come with the retail edition, and you put them into the leftmost space on this board. And now we're going to populate the board with resources. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill up the forest. So you'll notice here on the forest space, there are 3 woods and a mushroom. So we'll just put those out now. We've also got the tanning area here, which will populate with 3 meats and 3 hides. Down here we've got the wild buffalo area, so we'll put out some wild buffalo tokens. These will be card in your retail version. And so that's it for the main game board. That's all set up and ready to play. So we just set up the players' game boards and we're good to go. And so because we're playing a 3-player game, each player has a player board, 4 nomads, 3 link tokens, and this copy token as well. Each player also has a totem pole token, but we've already put those out. If this were a 4-player game, everyone would lose a nomad. So you'd only have 3 each. In the 2-player game, each player will take 4 nomads and 3 link tokens belonging to a color not being used in that game. Now each player gets 2 leather and a wood as their starting resources and puts them onto their resource space on their player boards. You'll take your copy power token and turn it to the grayed out side, that's the side that indicates it's been used or cannot be used, and you'll put it down here into this space on your player board. Each player is going to get a secret objective. So you can put the rest of the secret objectives back in the box. You won't need them this game. Finally, we'll decide who goes first. I think it should be the blue player, which means that in clockwise order, green player is second and yellow player is third, which means that the green player gets a bonus mushroom and the yellow player gets a mushroom and a generosity token. If we're in a 4-player game, the 4th player would get 2 mushrooms and a generosity token. There's a handy little reminder of each player's starting resources based on their position here on the resource section of the player board. So now that we've done that, we're all ready to play Neta-Tanka. So we've got the 3-player game set up here, and what I'm going to do now is go into the gameplay. And if you're wondering about the mountain board, we'll cover that at the end of the video in its entirety. So, Neta-Tanka. What I do know is that they are the sort of like super chief, and that each clan has their own chief, and that one of those chiefs is going to have to take over when the Neta-Tanka retires. Or dies. So we represent the clans who've come from across North America to compete, to prove we are the most worthy of becoming the new Neta-Tanka. And the way we're going to do that is by managing resources and building tents and totem poles and also cooking food. And if we are the best amongst all of those things, by the end of it, we will become the new Neta-Tanka, and everyone else can go home. The way this manifests in the game is that we'll be doing 3 rounds in a phase. And the first round will be a worker placement phase where we select actions off of this board. The second phase will involve us claiming our workers back and taking the actions that we've selected. And the final phase will be like a bit of a cleanup phase where we reset the board and get ready for round 2. There are 6 ways to get victory points in Neta-Tanka. The first is by making tents. The second is by building your totem pole. The third is by cooking food. The fourth is by making handicrafts. The 5th is generosity points. And the 6th is by completing your secret objective, which is only worth 3 points. And a winning score in Neta-Tanka is anywhere from about 40 to 60, depending on your player count. So 3 points might be a big deal, but it might not. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at the player board in a bit more detail, because all of these avenues are laid out on your player board, which is pretty much exclusively used for keeping track of how many points you've scored over the course of the game. Once we've had a look at that, we'll then talk about the worker placement step, and then we'll go on to talk about the action step. And the worker placement step I'll keep relatively brief, explaining just how to execute it, and then we'll look at all the spaces in more detail in the action step, because that's when you'll be taking the workers back. Once you understand the action step, you'll understand the considerations you need to make in the worker placement step a bit more clearly. So here we've got our blue player's first player board. We've got a set of tents along the top here. This is where we're going to track our tents score. We've got our totem pole here in the middle. This is where we'll build our totem pole. Down here we've got the cooking, and here's the cooking section here. And along the side we've got the handicrafts and where we're going to build them, and a little reminder. So the iconography in this game is quite important to learn. This is the universal symbol for tents, for cooking and for handicrafts, and for the totem pole. And these 4 things are your primary ways of getting points. Now you'll need to check your secret objective right at the start to ensure that you can get it. In this case, what this is saying is that I'm going to get 3 victory points. This is the universal symbol for victory points. I'm going to get 3 victory points at the end of the game if I have at least 2 generosity tokens and 4 victory points for the cooking objective. So we'll look at how that works in a minute. So the first track we've got is the TP track here. And what you're going to be doing is filling up from left to right along this track. You can see there are these little white arrows indicating the direction you go. So the first TP I build is worth 3 points. The second is 4 points. 4 points again, 6 and 7. You'll notice that there are some resource spaces here as well. And if I want to progress onto the rest of the track, I'm going to have to put those resources down. And that's a one-time payment, and I can pay it at any point. Now we can see here from this symbol here that each TP costs 2 leather and a wood. So that means I could actually build a TP right at the start of the game if I wanted. So if I take the right actions, I can build a TP, in which case I put this down here, and that just indicates that I've built one. You may not be able to get all of the resources down at once, depending on the actions you've taken. It is possible to put down just one resource and finish the TP later on. If you want to start putting resources in this space, you will of course have to pay the mushroom cost. And then it's a meat to move on, and down here it's a meat and a mushroom as well if you want to unlock the full track. You can unlock these spaces before you continue working on the TPs if you want. It's entirely up to you. If you have the deluxe version, you can free up these resources to go back to the communal pool and replace them with one of these wooden TPs there. And at the end of the game, you'll just score points for each space that you filled along the track. So next we'll look at the cooking. The cooking is also very simple. At any point when you take the cooking action, you can take mushrooms and meat from your resources, so you'll need to have some available to you, and you can just put them down in the slots on this board. You can put them in any slots you want, it doesn't actually matter, but it's set up into 2 sets of 5 because when you complete 5 spaces, you can start using your copy action token. And I'll explain how this works later when we get to the worker placement phase, but you don't get to use it until at least 5 slots are full, which is why they're set up into 5 slot sections. But once you've filled in all 10, then you cannot commit any more food to the cooking pot. You can also not replace mushrooms with meat, so you want to be careful about choosing the slots to fill up, and that's because at the end of the game you can see each mushroom in here is worth 1 point, and each meat in here is worth 2 points. So the next one we'll look at is handicrafts. And the handicrafts refer to these 3 things here. So we've got drums, bows and arrows, and clothes. And these are the cards you'll be collecting over the course of the game in order to fulfill these slots. When you first acquire a handicrafts card, you just put it next to your player board because it's not yet been finished. And then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to take actions to put resources from your pool onto these items. Now you can see that the more resources they require, the more valuable they are. Each of these items has their own value here in the bottom right corner to show what they are worth in the end game. So if you construct this bow and arrow, it's worth 5 points. Once you've completed all the resource cost on the item, return those resources to the communal pool and slot it under the space on your board there to show that you've made one of those things. And at the end game, you'll score it. If you don't finish an item, it's worth nothing. If you happen to get a complete set of items, and the value doesn't actually matter, just that you've got one complete set of all 3 things, you'll get 5 additional points in the end game, which is what this symbol refers to. And so the final thing to look at is the totem pole. Now, we can only add wood and bone to the totem pole, which are the brown and white resource markers. And you can add any number of these to the totem pole. So you can just continue to add wood if you want. But if you'd like to add a bone, you can. These are quite hard to come by. However, for every set of 2 wood and a bone that you've got, it's worth 5 victory points in the end game. And so that's something to consider as you add to the totem pole. But they don't have to be in any order. You certainly don't have to make the Oreo depicted here. You can just add them in any order that you want. And now here we've got the totem pole board. This is the 3-player one. And you can see here that it's made of 3 distinct spaces. And I think that each totem pole board has 1 space per player. So you can see here on the 4-player side, we've got 4 distinct spaces. And each of these spaces has a victory points value along the top. So each player starts in the -3 space. And what that means is that if you never work on your totem pole, you're going to get -3 points at the end of the game. This order is based on whoever's built the tallest totem pole. So the very first player to add resources to their totem pole will shoot up to the top spot. If you want to oust the player in the top spot, you have to build a totem pole taller than theirs. So if blue has added 4 pieces to their totem pole, then yellow will have to add 5 if they want to beat them. And it's worth noting that these 5 can all be wood. They don't have to include a bone. Then yellow would come up to the top spot and knock blue into the second place. And you'll notice that the middle space is divided into 2 sections based on the height of your totem pole. So because blue is equal to or less than 4, blue actually falls into the 0 point space. If blue then adds later to their totem pole, say they add 1 more resource, now they're on 5, they can move up here to the 4 point space. But they can't oust yellow because they still haven't beaten yellow. They've just equalized. Later, if green adds 6 pieces to their totem pole, they'll move up to the top slot, which will move yellow down to the middle slot and blue down to the bottom slot. Of course, it is possible for yellow to just take over blue here and knock blue back to the start as well. You don't always have to take the top spot in order to progress up the track. But the only time you'll ever be on a space with another player is right at the start of the game. Now, it's quite important to note that at the end of the game, whatever your position on this track is, this is the tiebreaker for the winner of the game. So if 2 of you have the same score, then it'll be whoever has the tallest totem pole by position on this board. So there can never be a tie in the end game. So just remember, if you want to oust someone from their position on the totem pole board, you have to beat them, not just equalize them. And so that's how you score points in Neta-Tanka, but how do we go about doing all of those things? Well, it's all to do with resource gathering and actions, which means spending resources. And that all happens on this main game board here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to explain how meeples are placed on this board and how those different meeple spaces work. But the agony of choosing which spaces to take will become apparent when we get to the action phase, in which I'll explain how all the actions are carried out. So let's talk about phase 1, the place nomads phase, which is essentially the worker placement phase. So what you're going to do is you're going to put 1 nomad down on a spot, and then play will pass to the next player in clockwise order, who'll do the same, and the third player who'll do the same, and then back to the blue player to begin a new round of meeple placement. So you each take turns until you've gone through all 4, and then the round is over and we'll go on to the action phase. And in order to understand this phase, you must understand the 3 worker placement slots on the board. So, if you're looking at this board, there are a few things to notice. First, all of these different clearings with a banner on them is a different space where you can take an action. They're all linked by these funny little paths with link icons on them. We'll talk about that in a minute. These 2 have footprints linking them. And this space is, of course, linked up here to the canoe space. Over here, you've got a space in isolation. It's not linked to anything at all. Same with this one over here as well. And they have these special symbols. There are 3 different types of nomad placement symbols. There's this one here, and this one here. And they're all a little bit different. This one here is a bit special as well, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So this section of the board is like the forest section, right? This is where you're going to go to get wood. And you can see 3 different kinds of spaces linked here. And it's also linked to 2 spaces on the side here. Now, all of these zones have specific names referred to in the rulebook, but we don't actually need to know those, so don't worry about them. This space here is the most common space on the board, and this is the single nomad space, which means that 1 player can put 1 colored nomad into that space, and once they've done that, nobody else can go in that space, unless they have a copy power that they can use to take that space, or if they're the Visiting Nomad, and they can copy that as well. It's like his special power is that he can copy one of these single location spaces. Note that you can't have 3 nomads in a space ever, so if someone put down the Visiting Nomad here to copy Blue's power, then the next player couldn't use their copy power to get in there as well. So that's the single space. Up here we've got what's called a group location, which only differs from the single space in that it can host any number of nomads provided they're all different colors. What this means is that if blue goes down there, green can also take this space as well, and yellow too. However, blue can't put down more than 1 nomad. This one down here with the dotted line is sort of attached to like the middle and the tent here, and this is called an elder space. And when you go down in an elder space, it's the same rules as the single location, with 1 exception. It is never possible to copy them, which means you can't copy it with the Visiting Nomad, nor can you copy it with your copying power. You can never take an elder space already claimed by another player. And note with the Visiting Nomad, he actually can't take elder spaces at all. So even if blue wasn't here, he still couldn't go down there because he's a bit of a wanderer with no allegiance, so he can't be trusted to go see the elders. Bye-bye. Now, it just so happens that this elder space is attached to this one by these footprints. And these footprints indicate that the elder has tasked you with doing something, and so instead of collecting this nomad for use again next turn, they're forced to go up here and take this space. This means that next turn, players will not be able to enter this space unless they have a copy power, and you will be forced to take these actions. You can see over here there's an elder space, but it doesn't have the footprints, so at the end of the game you just collect your piece as normal. Now if you take two spaces next to each other, then you can take one of your links and put it down here to show that you're going to get this link power in the action phase. And that's because you control both of the next door spaces. It is possible in very rare circumstances for, say, the blue player to take this space here, and then the green player will take this space here, and then the blue player will use their copy token to take this space here, thus gaining this link bonus, and then the green player will use their copy ability to take this space here, thus also gaining the link bonus. It's extremely unlikely, and I've never seen it happen, but it is a possibility. Note that the Visiting Nomad is colorless and will never contribute to a link bonus at all. Let's talk about these two spaces here. In a 3-player game like the one we're playing, 2 players can occupy this space because there's this 3+ meeple here. In a 2-player game or a solo game, only 1 person can go down here. So we'll talk about the Neta-Tanka action when we get to the action step next, but let's also talk about this link space because it's blank next to this stack. If you manage to acquire this link space, then you can put this guy out here, and in your action step, you can claim one of these guys. These are all sort of like bonus link symbols, and these will make more sense once you understand the actions on the board, because most of them just duplicate actions you can take on the board themselves. But what you can do with this token is you can take it and put it next to your player board, and then you can just keep it, and whenever you want, you can cash it back in, returning it to the supply on the board to enact the effect on the token. Which means if you really want, you can grab one early game and bogart it, or, you can cash it in whenever you like, trying to make it as inconvenient for the other players as possible. So just before I move on from the Nomad phase, let's talk about how the 2-player thing works. So remember, in the 2-player game, you have 8 Nomads in different colors. During the Place Nomads phase, you'll place a total of 6, which means you should always have 2 left over on your board. Now you can place them out in any order you want, which means you might have 2 green ones left over, or 2 orange ones, or a mixture of the 2. But you should always have 2 left on your board no matter what, which means that if some of them are stuck because you did an elder action with footprints, you don't get to put more out. Now this is an important element, because what this means is that these different colors here don't share link bonuses. So you need to try to place them in such a way that you get the actions you want, and also create link bonuses, which is why we took the link bonus tokens of both colors during the setup for 2-player. So that's how the worker placement part of this game works. Let's look at the action section. So here we've got an example of what a board might look like after the Nomad phase. So each player's placed 4 Nomads on the board, because this is a 3-player game, and now they're ready to do their actions. So starting with the first player, what they're going to do is they're going to take all of the actions available to them. Once the first player's taken all of their actions, then we'll go around in clockwise order to the green player, who will do all of theirs, and the yellow player, who'll do all of theirs. Note that this is distinct from the Nomad phase, in which each player takes a turn placing a Nomad. So it's useful to think of the action spaces on the board as kind of like divided up into sections. So over here you've got the hunter-gathering food section, and then up here you've got the cooking and canoe section. Over here we've got the sort of forest and wood gathering section, which moves into the totem pole section, and the handicraft section, and then the tent section over here, which moves back into the hunter-gatherer section. And each of these actions sort of allow you to do things that are associated with those kind of different points scoring methods. And then in the middle you've got the Neta-Tanka section, which is kind of its own special thing. So a lot of the resource gathering comes from these 2 spaces here, which need to be replenished in order for people to take resources. So there's a very important distinction, and that is the turquoise hand. So as you can see here on the forest section of the board, what we've got here are some wood symbols for collecting wood. There's another one down here on this link bonus, and another one down here, but this one's golden and has the turquoise hand, which is important to note. When this player is activated here, they'll get to collect this resource from the board. And it's collected from the board because there's no turquoise hand, which means they'll have to take it from the forest space here. If there was a turquoise hand, they would take it from the communal supply instead, so you could always get one. But if you were to take this space, and there wasn't enough wood in the forest, then you'd only be able to collect what was available. The same goes for this link here. If you are to activate this link, you can only take wood if there's wood available. Down here on the Elder space, you'll notice that there are 2 black arrows. This just means that you must make a choice between adding a wood to your totem pole or collecting a wood from the supply. So green's done quite a clever little trick here, where they'll collected lots of wood, and then they'll be able to add it to their totem pole, but if someone else gets the wood or they run out for whatever reason, then they can get a wood from the supply. Yellow's taken this space up here, which again involves collecting wood and mushrooms from the forest space here. Now, they can collect 1 wood or all available mushrooms, and that's why this you've got the faded out resources here with the ellipses, just to show that collect all mushrooms, or 1 wood. If there's nothing available, they'll get nothing. And this is why player order matters in the action phase as well. You'll have to be thinking about player order, because if green collects all of the wood, for example, then yellow can only take mushrooms because there's no wood left available. These spaces do not automatically replenish, but what you've got here is a replenishment action. So this here shows that there is 3 more wood and mushrooms coming out to the forest. When this is taken, these resources are added regardless of how many are available here. So what we'll do is we'll add 3 more wood and another mushroom. Note that this is only going to happen though if there's a player here to take this action. And as a reward for refilling the forest, which they must do, this headdress here indicates that this action must be taken, they'll get a generosity point for their troubles. And if you remember from the Nomad phase, green is going to have to take this action next turn, so you can make a sort of prediction about what's going to happen based on where the player's pieces are. You can see down here we've got a bonus link to add wood to your totem pole, and up here an action space that allows you to do the same thing. Continuing around the board, there's another link that allows you to collect wood, again only if wood is available. And then over here we've got this space here. Now this one's a bit interesting, so we'll come back and explain it later. So then down here we're moving into the handicrafts section of the board, and this space here, this elder space, allows you to choose either take a handicrafts card from the supply or add 1 wood or leather to a handicraft that you've already taken and are building. So you remember, of course, the handicraft supply along the side of the board, and when you get to take a card, you just pick one of the 5 cards available on the table, and then once that card's been taken, the top card of the deck here will come off the top of the deck, which has been face up, so that everyone knows what was there, and it will replenish the stack, and then you'll flip the next card face up as well, so everyone can see what's coming next. And then you just take the card you chose and put it down next to your board, and you'll have to complete that so that you can slot it and earn victory points in the end game. Then they've got the link bonus here, which allows you to do the same. Add 1 wood or leather to a handicraft that you've already taken and are building. And up here, it's the same again. So with these 3 actions here, the green player can actually add up to 3 resources to their handicraft, provided they have those resources in their personal supply. And so this link here allows you to go over to the handicrafts supply, discard 2 cards from the supply and replace them. So if you're looking for specific handicrafts to make, then this allows you just to cycle that deck a little bit to get some more cards out. So we just picked 2 of these that we weren't really into, get rid of them, replace them with new ones from the top of the deck here, and then flip the top one up just like normal. And then we can bottom deck these ones here, put them back on the bottom. You can see up here you've got the Gather Thoughts space, which is a group action. And each player who goes down here will gain 1 generosity point, which remember is a victory point at the end of the game, and the turquoise hand is present, so this comes from the general supply. Over here we've got Take a Leather as a link action, which also comes from the general supply, and that leads us into the TP action here, which allows you to add up to 3 resources to your tents. And remember, these resources don't have to be in any particular order, provided you've unlocked the positions. So we'll look at a quick example now. So the green player's player board is here. They've already built a tent, and they're working on their next tent. They've taken the action that allows them to add 3 resources. So they add 2 to this one, and then they put down this mushroom to unlock the next slot, which allows them to put down a wood here. If they didn't have any mushrooms, then they wouldn't be able to put this wood down, and that third placement opportunity would be lost. And you can see here that the tent action links into add another resource to a tent. This is just one, which links down here into this hunter-gather action. So you can see here we've got this hunter-gather action that blue has taken. This is another elder action, which means it can only be claimed with a colored nomad, and only one person can have it. You can take a meat from the supply, which is very good, or you can add a resource to a tent. And note that this commits you to the action up here, which is the hunt action. So again, this one gives you a generosity point because it's not really good for you. You don't get anything out of it, but what you do get to do is capture a buffalo, which means that one of these buffalo tokens up here is going to come down into the capture space. Now this is important for the next action we're going to look at, which is this action over here. This is the butcher action. So if you take this action, again, you've got a headrest option here, which means you must butcher a captured buffalo. So if there's one here, you have to turn it into meat and leather. So you take the token, you put it back into the wild, because there's always enough buffalo. And then you're going to add 3 meat and 3 leather to this supply here. And just like the forest, we add it no matter how much is available. Once that's been done, then you can take the second part of the action, which is to collect 2 leather. Because there's no hands, we collect it from the supply here. Now we've also got the link action down here, which is collect another leather. So we pick up 3 leather, probably the 3 we just got from this buffalo. Over here we've got a meat action, link action here, so we collect another meat from the supply here. And then over here we've got the smokehouse. This is where we're cooking the meat for consumption. And you'll notice that this action has this little wood symbol here. This means you have to return a wood to the supply in order to take this action. So the blue player is going to have to take one from their player board and return it back to the common pool. Then they can take 2 meat from the pile over here. And then we're over here into the cooking section. So down here we've got the Elder of Cooking, which comes with 2 options. Take a mushroom from the supply, or add a food from your personal supply to one of your cooking spaces. Basically cook a mushroom or a meat. So if we're the yellow player, we've only got a mushroom, so we can just take that and add it to our cook pot down here. That's going to be worth a point at the end of the game, and we're one step closer to unlocking our copy. Of course, this links into another cook space, and yellow's taken another cook up here, which is very silly because they only seem to have 1 mushroom. This one here is a wild, so you can see here we've got this pie with 4 different colors on it and a hand. So this allows you to take one of the 4 primary resources from the supply, which is any one of these, which you'll notice does not include the bone resource. So that means that yellow can grab a meat from here by spending their link. Then they can lie down here and collect a mushroom, and then they can cook that meat and cook that mushroom as well. So that's a clever little play they've done down here. And you'll notice that you take actions by lying your nomads down and collecting your link symbols to show that you've done that. You can see here the link from the cooking space into the forest space is take a mushroom from the forest. So if there's a mushroom there, you can collect it, and if not, you're out of luck. Finally, up here we've got the canoe space. Now this particular canoe space allows you to either take a handicraft card from the supply, just like we looked at earlier, or it allows you to take 1 meat or 1 wood from the supply as well. And all of these are different, and they'll change every round as well. I'm not going to go through all the cards, but they're all in an appendix at the back of the rulebook. There is one rather special action space here on these canoe tiles I just want to talk about, which is this one here. You can see here that you can give up some resources, just like on the Neta-Tanka space. And then what happens is you get to become first player, so you'll take the first player marker from whoever's got it, and next turn you'll be the first player. This can even be you. If you've already got it, you can just keep it. And then down here, we've got to take the Visiting Nomad. So this is how you get that Visiting Nomad guy. So you'll just take that and put it next to your player board, and next time you can place him in the Place Nomads phase. These actions are only found on the canoe tile itself. And now we're back to the forest space again, and we've been all the way around the board. So the only thing left to do is look at the middle space here, which is the Neta-Tanka space. So you'll notice that there are 4 links coming off of the Neta-Tanka space. We looked at this link earlier, which is to take one of these tokens, and this is particularly notable for this one here. This is one of only like 3 ways to get bone in the game. So you can get this one, and that'll give you a bone when you cash it in to the supply. There's also bone on this link here, which is one of the only ways to get a bone token. And the last way to get bone tokens is if you just so happen to get the Neta-Tanka card with a bone on it. So let's talk about this Neta-Tanka space here. When you put down a person in the Neta-Tanka space and take that action, you must pay a meat or 2 mushrooms. And this is because the Neta-Tanka demands a contribution for their efforts and wisdom. So you give up one of these resources, and then you can do one of two things. You can either add a bone to your totem pole, or take a Neta-Tanka card. This is the only way to add bone to your totem pole that I'm aware of. There's no other way. So this is a really important action space if you're working on your totem pole as a victory condition, but you don't have to. So you can also take a Neta-Tanka card. These work in just the same way as the Handicraft cards, so you pick one to have, and then you can keep it by your player board and use it when you want to. So you don't have to use it right away. This one allows you to add a wood to your totem pole and a wood or leather to one of your handicrafts when you cash it in, for example. This one here is take 3 leather from the supply, which you can tell because they're golden and have the turquoise hand. When you take a Neta-Tanka card, you just put it next to your player board, and then it's immediately replaced from the top of the deck, and the top card of the deck is flipped over and put back so everyone can see what's coming up next. Now, once you've got one of the cards claimed by your board, you can cash it in at any time for the effect on the card, but you can also cash it in at any time for a generosity token. It may well be that the situation has changed, the board state has changed, or your objective has changed and you just want that generosity token, and this allows you to get one. So you've got to remember that the Neta-Tanka card always has 2 functions on it. And of course, the last 2 links off Neta-Tanka here are collect a generosity from the supply and collect a meat from the supply. So the only space we haven't really talked about is this one. And this has a 3 times multiplier on it, which means you can do one of these things 3 times or each of these things once. It's up to you which ones you do and the order in which you do them. So this is all about generosity points. See, we've got the generosity point symbols up here. And this first one says that you can trade 1 generosity point for 1 resource of any type from the supply, not including bone. Of course, this is that 4 symbol pie chart that doesn't include bone. So you can trade in 1 generosity point for one of these 4 resources. And when you give this generosity point in for one of these resources, then you must return it to the common supply and take 1. However, what you can also do, you'll see the little white arrow is pointing both ways, you can also trade 1 resource of any type for a generosity token. But here's the kicker. The generosity tokens are a bit more valuable than these resources, so what that means is that you're going to have to give the resource you decide to trade in to another player. And when you do that, you'll get your generosity token from the bank. So you can do that up to 3 times. This one here is very simple. Trade in 1 of your generosity tokens to take a handicraft card. And again, you can do this up to 3 times. You'll note that this arrow is black, which means you can only go one way on this. You can't trade your handicraft cards for generosity. And similarly here, you can trade generosity tokens in to activate links on the board. So you can take any link you want. You can even take links that have been claimed by other players if you want. It doesn't matter if they've been used that round or not. So just pick up to 3 links on the board, pay 1 generosity token for each one, and then activate them and have the effect on the token. But it should be worth noting that the one caveat to this is that they must be 3 different link spaces. So you can't pick 1 and do it 3 times. You've got to do 3 distinct link spaces. And you can't take the blank space that allows you to collect tokens. And so that's how this space works. And that's it for the actions phase. So just to remind you in summary, when it's your turn, if you're the first player like blue is, for example, they'll choose the order they want to do their actions in and lie down their meeples as they choose to do them. It's important you don't remove them from the board at this stage, and you'll take up your links as you complete those actions as well. And the order in which you do these actions is very important because you'll be collecting resources and things from the board, and you might be adding more resources to those spaces as well. So you want to consider the importance of that. So let's talk about the final phase, which is the end of the round phase. So at this point, everyone's meeples will be lying down on the game board. And then what we'll do is we'll, in turn order, collect our meeples. And this is important because basically these 2 guys here, they're going to advance along the path up here and stand up. That's mostly why it's important that we lie these guys down instead of just collecting them all. And so you'll notice that next turn, blue and green will have 1 less nomad to put out. If somehow both buffalo were down here in the caught section, we'd stand 1 back up and return it to the wild. If there's more than 3 food in the food area of this space, it goes rotten, and food is removed until there's only 3 left. And the rest is returned to the common supply. Note that the leather does stay because that doesn't go off. And then the first player token moves, but only if it wasn't claimed here on one of the canoe tiles. So the first player token will move to the next player in player order. And then what we'll do is we'll swap over this canoe tile, so we'll discard the top one and flip over the next one. And then we'll advance the canoe round to the next space on the board. So you'll know it's the last round of the game because obviously the Canoe man will be on the last round symbol, but when you flip over the final Canoe tile, it will be the black bordered final tile we put at the bottom of the deck. And this usually has some special actions on it. For example, this one here will allow one player, whoever takes this, to discard a Handicraft. This is one they haven't finished, to gain 3 generosity points. So this is kind of like, oops, I didn't finish my Handicraft. I'll just ditch it. And instead, I'll just get 3 victory points. And so once everyone's completed their final action round, then we'll total up the victory points, and which we already looked at during the endgame scoring at the start of this when we looked at the player boards. So we already looked at endgame scoring during the section at the start of the gameplay when we looked at the player boards. But what I'll do is I'll just give you a quick example on one of the player boards here. Here we can see the blue player's board in the end game. So you can see here the end game scoring pad, and the very first thing we're going to score is tenths. So our player here has 2 tenths worth 7 points. Unfortunately, they weren't able to complete that third tent. The next thing we're going to score is the totem pole. So we'll check where they are on the totem pole track. So blues managed to come in second place, and they're up here, which gives them a total of 4 points for that. So now we're on 11, but we've also got 2 sets of bones in here with enough wood to make up another 10 points. So now we're on 21 points. And then the next thing we look at are the handicrafts. So you can see down the side of the board here, we've got 9 points in handicrafts, which is also 1 complete set for another 5, which is 14 points, which now puts us on 35. And then we're going to look at the cooking. We've got 6 points for meat and 2 points for mushrooms. That's another 8 points, putting us on 43. Then what we're going to do is we're going to check the objective card. Unfortunately, we don't seem to have any generosity points, so we don't score the 3 bonus points for that. Furthermore, because we don't have any generosity, we don't score any generosity points, giving our blue player a grand total of 43 points. And they've got to hope that's the winning score, or they've got to at least hope that it beats green, because green's got the top spot on the totem pole track. And so that's pretty much everything you need to know to play Neta-Tanka. But if you want to see it in action, you can come back tomorrow, where I'll be playing with my buddies Michael and Chris, and we'll be going through a full game with 3 players, so I hope you'll consider coming back and joining us for that. But before I go, I just want to explain the mountain board expansion for those of you that got it with the deluxe edition. So if you don't have that, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy your games of Neta-Tanka, but if you do, stick around, because we'll look at that now. So in order to set up the mountain expansion, you need this mountain prosperity board. You're going to need this little gather thoughts action replacement token. You're going to need these blue resource tokens. And you're going to need these random resource tiles. So, in order to set up, we're just going to put these in a general supply with all the other resources. I'm going to take these and put them face down like that. Shuffled, of course, so the order is unknown and random. Once that's done, we'll take the top one and flip it face up here on the god. And then we're going to take this action tile here and we're going to put it down here like this because it's going to replace this action with a whole new thing. And you'll note that there's actually a winter side as well, just in case you're playing on the winter board with this one. So the mountain is kind of like a whole new board that you can play on that has a very special kind of action space on it. So during the place nomad step, you might want to place a nomad down here onto this action space. You can only place one here. You can't place one here. This can only be accessed through walking. And you'll notice this is a red ring, making it distinct from the elder spaces. What this means is this cannot be copied or duplicated under any circumstances. Only one nomad here at any given time for any reason. So we can't put out the visiting nomad, we can't use our copy action, none of that. And then you get to take the mountain action in the action step. And we'll look at that in just a minute. But during the end phase, you will walk across here over to this space, and you can remain in this space indefinitely, choosing whether or not to pick up your guy at the end of the round. The only time that you're forced out of this space is if someone else takes this in the action phase, then when this one moves along, they bump you out. Functionally, these 2 action spaces are the same. And so when 2 players control them, they each get to do the mountain action in the action phase. The only difference is that this one also comes with a resource bonus. So when the player in this space takes the mountain action, they also get to collect 1 resource. Note this is the 4 resource wild symbol here. So that's meat, leather, wood, or mushroom. You can collect 1 of any kind of resource, but it doesn't have the turquoise hand, which means it has to come from the board. So you can grab a resource off the board. This can potentially prevent someone else from getting something they need as well. But you just grab whatever you want from the board and add it to your personal supply. So here we've got a bunch of actions, and most of these are fairly self-explanatory, but when you're in one of these action spaces, you get to lie down, as you would normally when you take the action, in order to carry out the God of Prosperity action. So we notice that in this case, this token has a leather and a wood on it. That means that you're going to have to take actions using leather and wood. This changes as we progress through the game. During the end phase, a new one will come out, replacing the existing one. They always have 2 resources on them, and if you can pay the resource cost of both, you must. So that means that you can't choose to pay 1 wood for an action and then not pay a leather for the action if you have a leather. So if you have both, you must pay both and do 2 things. And those 2 things are any one of these 8 things. So this one here is just grab a Handicraft card from the supply. This one here is work on a Handicraft. Down here we've got get 2 Generosity. Down here we've got a super special action we'll look at in a minute. Up here we've got add 3 resources to tents. Over here it's add a wood to your totem pole. Here it's add a bone to your totem pole. So this duplicates that super special Neta-Tanka action. And over here it's cook a food. And when you take these actions, you'll take the appropriate resource from your personal supply that you're paying and put it down here. That action cannot be taken again until someone clears this resource, and we'll look at how that's done in a minute. Let's look first at what happens if our blue player puts their leather down here to take this super special action at the bottom of the board. Note that they've now put out their 2, this is their 2 actions, and those 2 actions cannot be taken again until someone clears these resources. So if you put a resource down here, you get one of these special blue tokens. And these special blue tokens can be wood or leather. That's indicated up here by the God of Prosperity symbol inside the blue disc up here equals leather or wood. And what's special about this leather or wood is that you can see here if it's used for your tent, handicraft, or totem pole, then at the end of the game you'll get 3 victory points. So for every blue disc that you include in one of your constructed things here, the tents, handicrafts, or totem pole, you will gain 3 points. So obviously if you're adding this to a totem pole, it's wood. If you're adding it to a tent, it's either, and handicraft, it's either. But for each one you've spent, you will keep these on your player board in the relevant spot so you can count them up at the end of the game, 3 victory points for each one. So that's really potent. So of course, green will want to get their hands on these blue discs as well, which means they'll want to clear this resource. Remember how we changed the Gather Thoughts action? Well, that's how you're going to clear those resources. Now, when you go to the Gather Thoughts space, what you do is you clear the resource tokens off of the mountain board, and based on the number you clear, you'll get generosity tokens. So if you clear 1, you'll get 0 generosity. 2 gets you 1, and clearing 3 gets you 2 generosity tokens. And so if the green player has their piece down here, they'll lay them down. Then they're going to clear off these 2 resources that blue just put out. They'll gain 1 generosity to their personal supply for that. Now when they lie their piece down, they can go ahead and get that nice blue action as well, plus something else. And then in the end phase, these 2 will stand up. And this guy will move along and oust the blue player. And that's how the mountain expansion works. So we're not going to use that tomorrow in our game because it's not included in the retail edition and we only wanted to use components that everyone would have. But I hope that's given you some insight to how it works and whether it's something that you're interested in for Neta-Tanka. But I hope that you'll come along and join us tomorrow for our Neta-Tanka adventure, and I hope this video has been of value to you, teaching you how to play the game and getting you started on your own sessions. So thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow.